and the transfer, or I tell your firm you've been sharing client files with a competitor. Your choice. You have until tomorrow morning. That was the voicemail my brother left me. I listened to it twice, standing in the parking garage of my office building at 7:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. My car keys were in my hand. I didn't drop them. I want to tell you that I immediately knew what to do. I want to say I was calm, that some part of me had been preparing for this moment for years. But the truth is, I just stood there under the fluorescent lights, listening to the echo of my own breathing, thinking about how my brother's voice still sounds exactly the same as when we were kids. Like he's always just a little annoyed at me for existing. Let me back up. I'm a contract attorney, have been for 6 years. I specialize in commercial real estate transactions, the kind of work where a single misplaced comma can cost a client $500,000. I am precise for a living. I review documents the way other people check their phones, constantly, compulsively, because the cost of missing something is too high. My firm is small, 12 attorneys, good reputation in the Austin market. I have a 401k, a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in South Congress, and a carefully maintained professional reputation that I have never once done anything to jeopardize. My brother is 4 years older than me and has never, in his adult life, held a job for longer than 18 months. This is not me being cruel. This is documented fact. Restaurant manager, insurance adjuster, car dealership finance guy, consultant for a company that turned out to be a multi-level marketing operation selling supplements. Every time something ends, he calls our mother and our mother calls me, and somehow, always the situation becomes my problem. I paid 3 months of his rent in 2019 because our mother said he'd be evicted before Christmas. I co-signed a personal loan in 2021 because our mother said he just needed a fresh start and it would be fine. It was not fine. I ended up covering 8 months of payments before I stopped returning calls. The thing about being the responsible sibling is that your family doesn't see it as a character trait. They see it as a service. You are not someone who made different choices. You are a utility. A financial utility that comes with the bonus feature of not fighting back very hard. I had started to fight back though, slowly. The way you do when you finally get tired enough that the fear of conflict feels smaller than the exhaustion of giving in. I'd said no to the loan extension. I'd stopped answering Sunday calls from my mother if I hadn't heard from her all week. Small things, but they'd noticed. So when my brother called in October and said he needed to talk to me about our grandmother's property, I knew it wasn't going to be simple. My grandmother passed 18 months ago. She left a piece of land outside of Fredericksburg. Nothing enormous, about 11 acres, an old house on it that needs work, split equally between my brother and me. We'd never formally settled the estate. Things moved slowly. My brother kept saying he wanted to handle it together, which I'd learned over the years means he wants to handle it in a way that benefits him, while appearing collaborative. He wanted me to sign a transfer document that would give him sole ownership of the property so he could sell it to a developer. He'd already been in contact with the developer. He'd already, apparently, verbally agreed to a number. The number he quoted me as my share was about 40% of what the property was actually worth, based on current Fredericksburg land values, which I knew because I'd had a colleague pull comps 3 months earlier when I started to suspect something like this was coming. I told him I needed to review any documents before signing anything. He said there wasn't time, the developer had a deadline. I said that wasn't how real estate transactions work, and that I was, in fact, an attorney who handled real estate transactions. He said I was being difficult. I said I was being accurate. We hung up without resolving anything. That was 2 weeks before the voicemail. In the gap between that phone call and the voicemail, I learned a few things. My brother had, at some point, told our mother that I was planning to force a partition sale of the property just to spite him, which was not true and which I had never said or implied in any way. My mother called me in tears asking why I wanted to hurt the family. I explained, calmly, that I'd simply asked to review documents before signing them, which is a thing that every attorney and also every non-attorney adult human being should do. She said I was being legalistic. I said that was actually a compliment given my profession. I also learned that my brother had already told the developer the deal was done. He'd taken a small cash advance from them. I don't know the exact amount, but enough to have spent some of it, based on his verbal assurance that the paperwork was a formality. It was not a formality. I owned half that property and I had not signed anything. The voicemail came on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, I had done the following things. I had forwarded the voicemail to my personal email, saved it to 2 cloud accounts, and texted a screenshot of the transcription to my best friend with a note that said, "Saving this. Don't respond yet. Just hold on to it." She sent back a single thumbs up. She's known me since law school. She understood. I had called a real estate attorney I know personally, not through my firm, and described the situation in general terms without identifying specifics. She confirmed what I already knew. The threat in the voicemail was not legally coherent. I had done nothing involving client files, and more importantly, an attempt to make a false report to my employer about professional misconduct is potentially actionable on its own. I had also, very quietly, called the county clerk's office in Gillespie County to confirm the current status of the property deed and to ask a few procedural questions about what a partition action would actually look like, timeline and cost, just so I understood my full range of options. I did not call my brother back. I did not call my mother. I went to work, reviewed 3 commercial lease agreements, ate lunch at my desk, and left at a normal time. Here is something they don't tell you about being the responsible one. You get very good at appearing fine. It is almost a professional skill at this point. I sat through a 2-hour closing meeting that Wednesday afternoon, and not one person in that conference room would have guessed that my brother had left me a blackmail voicemail the night before. I poured water from a glass pitcher into a glass and my hand didn't shake. But I want to be honest about what was happening underneath that, because I've seen enough stories where the person telling it sounds like they were completely composed and strategic the whole time, like they were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and that's not what this was. What this was? I cried in my car in the parking garage Thursday morning before I went into the office. Not for long, 10 minutes maybe, but I cried because I was angry and because I was sad and because somewhere under all the legal analysis and the careful documentation, I still had a part of me that remembered being a kid who loved her brother and thought he was funny and used to watch movies with him on Friday nights. Grief and strategy can exist in the same person at the same time. I just want to say that. By Thursday afternoon, I had made a decision that I hadn't fully named yet, but that I think I'd been moving toward for longer than I realized. I was going to stop being available. Not in the dramatic, announcement-making way. Not with a confrontation or a letter or a phone call where I said my piece and waited for an apology that was never coming. I was going to do it the quiet way. The permanent way. My lease was up in January. I had been vaguely considering renewing it, the way you do when your life has sufficient inertia and the thought of moving feels like a lot of work. I had not seriously considered that I could go somewhere else. But I had a law school friend who'd moved to Portland 2 years ago, kept telling me the market there was interesting and the cost of living was more manageable than people thought if you were coming from Austin. I had an old colleague who'd gone in-house at a tech company in Nashville and said they were always looking for commercial real estate counsel. I had, if I was honest with myself, been browsing job listings in other cities in the way you do when you're not ready to admit you're actually looking. I started actually looking. I also started the partition process. Not as revenge. I want to be clear about that. I started it because it was my legal right, because the property was half mine, and because my brother had put himself in a position where an informal agreement was no longer possible or safe for me. I filed the request the following Monday. My brother would be formally notified. The developer would learn that the deal was not, in fact, done. The advance my brother had taken would become his problem to sort out. I did not call to warn him. I did not give him an opportunity to negotiate privately. He had told me the deadline was tight. I simply made sure the timeline worked in my favor instead. What I did do was send one text to my mother. It said, "I know he told you a version of the situation. When you're ready to hear mine, I'm here. I love you. But I'm not going to keep absorbing consequences for choices I didn't make." She didn't respond for 4 days. In the meantime, I accepted a phone interview for an in-house position in Denver. I hadn't even been thinking about Denver specifically, but the recruiter reached out. The company was a regional commercial developer. The role was exactly what I did, and Denver felt far enough that it felt like a real decision rather than just relocation. I did the phone interview on my lunch break, sitting in a small park 2 blocks from my office, and I was good. I knew I was good. 6 years of doing this work, and I could talk about commercial real estate contract structures in my sleep. They asked me to come in for an in-person interview. I booked the flight. I told no one at my firm. I told my best friend, who said, "Finally." I didn't fully understand what she meant by that until later. She said she'd been watching me make myself smaller for 3 years, fitting my life around a family that was never going to fit itself around me. And she was glad I was finally taking up the space I'd always been entitled to. I went to Denver on a Thursday. The office was in Loudoun, close to the 16th Street Mall, in a building with good light and a coffee bar in the lobby that wasn't pretentious about it. The people I met were direct and interesting. The general counsel was a woman about 15 years older than me who had very clearly built something she was proud of and wanted people around her who were proud of their work too. I liked her immediately. The conversation felt like the beginning of something rather than an audition. I flew home Friday evening. My brother had by then been formally served at the partition filing. He had called me 7 times. I had not answered. He had also, I learned from a text my mother sent me late Friday night, gone to our mother's house and told her that I had filed a lawsuit against him and was trying to take his inheritance and ruin his relationship with the developer. My mother's text said, "Is this true?" I responded, "Half of it. Call me when you want the other half." She called Saturday morning. I told her, clearly and without editorializing, what had happened from the beginning. The property valuation, the lowball offer, my request to review documents before signing, his response, the voicemail, the advance he'd taken on a deal I hadn't agreed to, the partition filing, which was not a lawsuit against him but a legal mechanism for resolving co-ownership when parties can't agree, which any first-year law student could explain. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me about the voicemail?" I said, "Because I needed to handle it before I could tell anyone about it. And because I needed to know what I was going to do first." She didn't have a response to that. We talked for another 20 minutes about things that weren't the property, her garden, her neighbor's new dog, a show she'd been watching. It was almost normal. I think we were both trying. I got the job offer from Denver on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the in-person interview. The number was better than I'd expected. The title was better than I currently had. The general counsel sent a personal note with a formal offer that said she'd been impressed with how I thought through problems in real time during our conversation, and that was the quality she'd been looking for. I read that email standing in my kitchen at 6:45 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt something quieter than that. Something that took me a few minutes to identify. It was relief. Pure, structural, foundational relief. Like a load-bearing wall I'd been propping up with my own body had finally been removed from the blueprint entirely. I gave notice at my firm the following Monday. My managing partner was gracious about it, surprised, I think, genuinely, and said if I ever wanted to come back to the Texas market, to call him first. I said I would. I meant it. I told my mother I was leaving Austin. She cried, which I had expected. She asked if this was because of my brother, and I said it was because of me. That was also true. I had wanted to leave for longer than I'd been willing to admit, and he had simply accelerated the timeline by forcing me to look clearly at what I was holding on to and why. My brother called me the day the partition sale was finalized. The property sold at full market value through a court-supervised process. My half, after legal fees, was significantly more than what he'd offered me in his original informal arrangement. He called it stealing. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail he left was long and not worth repeating. He talked about family and loyalty and how I'd humiliated him with the developer and how I would regret this. He sounded genuinely convinced that I had wronged him. I've thought about that a lot since then. The way someone can participate in something and then construct a version of it in their head where they are the one who was wronged. I think he'd been doing that his whole life. I think I'd been letting him. I moved to Denver in February. I packed what mattered, sold or donated the rest, and drove my car up on a Sunday with a playlist I'd been building for months without knowing what it was for. I got off I-25 into the city with the mountains visible in the west and something in my chest that had been clenched for years just loosened. Not all at once, but enough. My mother and I talk every Sunday now. We don't talk about my brother. I don't know exactly what the state of his life is, and I've made peace with not knowing. I hope he figures something out. I genuinely do. But hope is not the same as responsibility. And for most of my adult life, I had been treating them as interchangeable. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The people who benefit from your tolerance will always frame your boundaries as aggression. When you stop subsidizing someone's bad decisions, they will call it abandonment. When you protect yourself legally, they will call it betrayal. When you leave, they will say you destroyed the family, as though the family was not already broken, as though you are not the one who had been quietly holding pieces together for years while pretending not to notice the cost. The voicemail my brother left me was supposed to make me afraid. It made me clear. I changed my phone number 2 weeks after I got to Denver. Not to hide, my mother has the new one, my firm has it, my best friend has it. I changed it because some doors don't need to stay open just because they've always been open. Some chapters end not with a confrontation, but with an administrative update and a new area code. I have a view of the mountains from my office now. Not a dramatic view, just a sliver between 2 buildings, but it's there. I look at it sometimes between calls when I'm thinking through a complicated clause or waiting for a document to load. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's mine. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm standing in that parking garage, keys in my hand, listening to my brother's voice telling me to sign over my inheritance or he would burn my career to the ground. And I didn't panic. I didn't cry right then. I just stood there and thought, he really doesn't know who I am. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. Not what he did, but why he thought he could. He thought he could because it had worked before. Every time I'd wired money, co-signed a loan, absorbed a consequence that wasn't mine, I've been teaching him something. I've been teaching him that I was safe to take from, that the cost of crossing me was low. That's not a character flaw in him alone. That's a pattern 2 people build together, even when only one of them knows they're building it. What I did right, and I don't say that with any pride, just clarity, was that when the moment finally came, I didn't react. I documented, I called the right person. I understood what I was actually dealing with before I made a single move. That's not something that came naturally to me. It came from years of doing careful work in a field where the cost of missing something is real and permanent. I had trained myself to read the document before I signed it. I just had to finally apply that same standard to my own life. There's a version of this story where I confronted him, where I gave a speech, where I told my mother everything immediately and waited to be believed. I used to think that version was the honest one, that silence meant I was avoiding something. But honesty doesn't require an audience. What I did was true. I filed what was legally mine to file. I protected what was legally mine to protect. The fact that I did it quietly doesn't make it less real. The hardest part wasn't the partition filing or the job search or even packing up an apartment I'd lived in for 4 years. The hardest part was the morning I cried in my car before work, and then went upstairs and sat through a 2-hour closing meeting and poured water from a pitcher without my hand shaking. That's not toughness in the way people usually mean it. Gritted teeth, no feelings. That's something quieter. It's choosing to keep functioning while something inside you is genuinely grieving. My brother and I used to watch movies on Friday nights when we were kids. I loved him. I still do. And the way you love a version of someone who no longer exists. That grief was real. I let it be real. And then I kept going. My mother and I talk every Sunday now. We don't talk about him. I don't know if that will always be true. But I know that the relationship we have now is more honest than the one we had when I was pretending everything was fine to keep the peace. I think about the property outside Fredericksburg sometimes. 11 acres, an old house that needed work. My grandmother left it to both of us because she believed in both of us equally. My brother turned that into a transaction. I turned it into a door I finally walked through. The mountains are visible from my office window, just a sliver between 2 buildings, but they're there. Some mornings, I look at them between calls and think, you did the right thing. Not the easy thing. Not the thing anyone applauded, but the right one. That's enough.